Since the launch of Monster Hunter World, I have been making build videos to help hunters take on the challenging hunts in the game, but now the best of the best builds are all done, things don't feel as challenging anymore. So with that, I present to you the Budget Build Challenge. For this video, we'll be looking at a budget build for the hammer. Now, what is the Budget Build Challenge? Well, it's where we take a basic endgame vanilla Iceborne budget build and test it against some of the hardest hunts in the game and see how it performs. Of course, there are some self-imposed rules for this budget build challenge. So firstly, the builds can only use armor and weaponry below the rank of Runa no Gigante, and they can only be from the base version of Monster Hunter World Iceborne 2. So whilst the likes of Gold Rathian or Brute Tigrex are allowed, weapons and armor from the likes of Rajang, Stygian Zenoga, Raging Brachydios and so on cannot be used. The next rule is that the builds cannot contain any tier 4 decorations, so no decorations that have 2 skills on them. The decorations have to be easily farmable from high rank quests. Lastly, this challenge will feature 3 hunts, one against Tempered Runa no Gigante, the next against one of the normal additional monsters added to the game, so Rajang, Frostfang, Barrelf, Stygian Zenoga, and then finally the last test will either be against Vitalis or Elatrion, depending on the build we are using. So, with the rules in place, let's get into this. When it comes to the hammer, it is a hard-hitting weapon, thus it favours raw attack more than anything else. So the builds I use tend to steer towards increasing our raw attack as well as our other DPS skills. On top of that, thanks to the hammer being a blunt weapon, it comes with some natural crowd control thanks to being able to KO a monster. So long as you're hitting it in the head, of course. You can of course hit other parts of the body if you're fighting a normal monster to exhaust them, but this won't work against Elder Dragons. The hammer doesn't have many defensive skills though, so for this budget build I will be using a combination, a hybrid build for the hammer that utilises DPS in the form of high raw attack as well as some defensive options, namely Divine Blessing. So for this build, you'll need the Rex Raw Helm Alpha, the Golden Loom Mel Beta, the Rex Raw Braces Alpha, Golden Loom Coil Beta, and the Garuga Grease Beta. I'm also using a Handicraft Charm 5, although this may only be a Handicraft Charm 4, depending on how far you've got through the game. And for the weapon, I'm using the Grinding Mallet. This is the Acidic Glavenus hammer. This has an affinity increase augmentation, health regen augmentation, and then an attack increase augmentation attached to it. As for the specialist tools, these are down to personal preference, but I want to use this build against Vitalis, so we're taking the Temporal and Rocksteady mantles. Now, when it comes to the decorations, you've got a fair few to play around with. So firstly, I've gone for Tenderizer Jaws to max out Weakness Exploit. I've then gone for Critical Jaws to max out Crit Boost, Attack Jaws to max out Attack Boost, a Sharp Jaw to give us Protected Polish, Expert Jaw for some Critical Eye, and an Elementalist Jaw to give us that non-elemental boost skill. As for the decorations on the mantle, they're down to personal preference, but like I said, we're going to be trying this against Vitalis, so I've gone for Heavy Artillery Jaws shown here to give us the Heavy Artillery skill for when we're taking on the Black Dragon. So, if you've done what I've done here, you'll have a build with 150 health, 100 stamina, which will be 200 health and 150 stamina when you're on a hunt and taking all your relevant consumables. You have a raw attack of 1799 with a small chunk of purple sharpness. Unfortunately, this build does need the handicraft so we can get to that purple sharpness, but it's hard to maintain that said purple sharpness, so you may be having to deal with white sharpness for the majority of a hunt with this build. Anyway, you have an affinity rating of 30%, which can easily be 80% when you take into account Weakness Exploit. You have no element, and you have an OK defense of 989 that is strong against fire and dragon, but unfortunately weak to the other elements. Now, when it comes to the skills, first of all, you have Attack Boost at level 7. Attack Boost increases the raw attack of a build, and at level 4 or above, it also provides us a bonus 5% extra base affinity. You'll also have Handicraft at level 5, increasing the sharpness of this weapon. You do need Handicraft with this build so you can get to that purple sharpness, so that's something you need to be mindful of. You'll also have Divine Blessing at level 5, our main defensive skill here, which gives us a chance at taking reduced damage should we take a hit from a monster. You also have Health Boost at level 3, allowing our health to get to that maximum of 200. You have Critical Eye at level 3, increasing the base affinity of this build. You have Critical Boost at level 3, which allows our critical hits to deal more damage, but this increase in damage is only applied to the raw portion of an attack, not the elemental portion, although this is an elementalist weapon so it doesn't matter. You also have Weakness Exploit at level 3, which gives us an increase to our affinity so long as we're attacking monster weak points, and should these weak points be tenderized through Clutch Claw attacks first, this increase to our affinity is even greater. Weakness Exploit at level 3 can potentially provide us a bonus 50% extra affinity. You also have Free Meal at level 1, which is a byproduct of the armor we're using. Not really that useful in a fight, but it still can be kind of useful in a way. Basically, it gives us a chance at not consuming a potion or other consumable when we take it. You also have Protective Polish level 1, which could be considered an essential skill for this build. This works well in unison with Handicraft. Basically, when we sharpen our weapon, it will put a protective coating over our sharpness gauge, preventing any sharpness loss for a small duration of time, thus allowing us to keep that purple sharpness for a little bit longer. You also have non-elemental boost at level 1, which will increase the raw attack of a build when the weapon in question doesn't have any element attached to it, or the element or ailment is hidden, as is the case with the acidic glavinus hammer we are using. Finally, when you're wearing your mantles, you have the heavy artillery level 2, which increases the damage of our cannons and ballistas we use. Finally, when it comes to the set bonuses, you only have one of them, which is the Gold Raffian Essence. For wearing 2 pieces of this armor set, we'll get the Divine Blessing Secret, allowing us to get the Divine Blessing skill from level 3 to level 5, enhancing its capabilities, adding to our overall defense with this build should we get hit. So there we have it, that is the budget build for the hammer I will be using for this budget build challenge. It is a little bit cheeky because this is on the cusp of being a budget build, but it still falls within the parameters of the rules that were set out. But with that being said, there are of course pros and cons to every build in the game. No weapon or build is absolutely perfect. When it comes to this build, its biggest pro is its raw damage output. Having attack boost at level 7 combined with the affinity based skills, we're able to dish out a lot of damage to monsters, especially if we're hitting them on the weak points. The next pro for this build is its survivability. Having Divine Blessing at level 5 and health boost at level 3, it adds to our survivability, reducing the likelihood that we'll die should we take a hit from a monster. And then finally for the pros is that this is a non-elemental build, which means that it can be used against pretty much any monster in the game, regardless of their resistances. But of course there are cons. One of the biggest cons for this build is, unfortunately, although we can get purple sharpness, it's hard to maintain that purple sharpness for long durations of time. And the other con is this is a borderline budget build. It does have some pieces from the endgame monsters of the base version of Monster Hunter World Iceborne, which can be difficult for some players to get, unfortunately. But like I said, this still falls within the rules, so I'm going to go with it. That being said, this build is strong, and so long as you go for monsters' heads, you can potentially knock them out. Adding a little crowd control to this build, it's got a lot going for it. So with that, let's move on to the challenges. First of all was Tempered Ruin and Gigante via the Ode to Destruction event quest. Now, in all honesty, when jumping into this hunt, I had little fears that this build would be good, and I was proven right. The build was able to do Tempered Ruin and Gigante quite quickly, especially when it came to breaking its spikes, knocking it over multiple times, combined with the fact that if you go for the head, you can knock out the monster that way as well. This gave us lots of opportunities to perform the hammer's longer, hard-hitting combos, allowing us maximum DPS. On the rare occasion that Gigante did hit me, Divine Blessing combined with health boost meant that there was little danger of me fainting, making this a very comfortable hunt in all honesty. So that brings us on to the next hunt, which was against Frostfang Barioth. Now this was a tempered Frostfang Barioth, and I was a little bit concerned because of its speed. Its speed and the way the hammer works, having to power charge your weapon first, I was worried that I would be getting knocked out of the power charge stance quite a bit, especially because this build lacks flinch free. But that being said, thanks to the high attack on this build, focusing on the right body parts and using a few cheeky traps here and there, the speed of Frostfang Barioth was countered, allowing this build to deal decent damage to it and bring it down relatively quickly. Which brings us on to the third and final challenge, which was against the Black Dragon Fatalis. Now, as always with these budget builds, Fatalis is the true test, especially because we do lack certain skills that I would normally recommend for taking on Fatalis, like Part Breaker, but I was still relatively confident with the hammer's ability to take on Fatalis. The hammer's clutch claw attack meant that we could focus on its head when the opportunity presented itself, and of course using the heavy artillery on our mantles meant that we could make use of the cannons and ballistas to stun it, leaving its head open for our longer combos and give us an opportunity to break its horns. I also strive to break the horns at least once, and the hammer was able to do that with this build. Whilst not a flawless hunt, I did cut 1 or 2 times with this build, it was nonetheless one of the quicker budget builds that took on Fatalis, and I was in fact able to break the horns twice with this build. Divine Blessing definitely helped this build in the Fatalis hunt, as it kicked in quite often when we took a hit, and made up for the fact that we didn't have evade window. That all being said, this build comfortably took down the Black Dragon, at least for me. You may have different results, but nonetheless, this build can do it. So there we have it, that was the budget build challenge using the hammer. Hopefully it showed you what limited builds can do in the game. Also, I'm sure that the builds used in these videos could be adapted to make certain monsters more easier, like for example, taking Part Breaker for Fatalis, so adapt the builds as you see fit. And until next time, I've been Darcblade, bringing you the budget build challenge in Monster Hunter World Iceborne. Hope you enjoyed the video, Thanks for watching, subscribe and like for more.